Corliss Bancroft is 56 years old. He farmed 640 acres outside Paxton, Illinois, on the same ground his father Halsey worked from 1968 until Halsey passed in 2012. The combine Corliss runs every fall harvest is the 2019 John Deere S680. He bought certified used in March of 2022 for $284,000. 530 horsepower, 9.0-liter PowerTech engine, JDLink connected, operations center registered. Corliss had finished 184 acres of the 2024 corn harvest by Saturday afternoon, October 5th, 2024, when the S680's dash threw a software update prompt at the headland and locked her into limp mode at 4.2 miles per hour. The S680's instrument cluster displayed a single message: required firmware, update phi 14.2.184, contact authorized dealer for installation. Below that message, the harvest data feed to JDLink stopped transmitting. Below that, the dashboard auto shutdown timer counted from 48 hours down to 0. After 48 hours of operation without the firmware update, the S680 would refuse to start. If this kind of story matters to you, the kind where the iron belongs to the farmer who paid for it, not the corporation that pushed the firmware, we'd be honored if you subscribed. Corliss called JD Champaign service at 8:14 a.m. Monday morning, October 7th, 2024, from the kitchen line. Patients sat at the desk, listening on speakerphone. Riley Dunhaven picked up at the dealership counter. JD Champaign service. Riley Dunhaven, Riley said. Riley, Corliss Bancroft outside Paxton? Corliss replied. My 2019 S680 through the firmware update V 14.2.184 prompt at the headland Saturday afternoon. Auto shutdown timers at 36 hours and counting. I have 456 acres of standing corn and a Wednesday cold front. What's the install cost? Mr. Bancroft, the V14.2.184 update is a major firmware release that requires a service advisor connection from a JD master technician at your shed, Riley said. The labor charge is $4,800 for the technician trip and 3-hour install. The service advisor seat license for the update push is $1,400. The firmware itself is $800. Total $7,000. Riley, $7,000 for a software update, Corliss said. Mr. Bancroft, the firmware update is mandatory under the JD Operations Center connectivity terms of your S680 purchase agreement, Riley replied with a small dismissive chuckle. The combine won't start after the 48-hour shutdown timer without the update applied. The shutdown is a safety feature. Riley, the shutdown is a service revenue feature, Corliss answered. Mr. Bancroft, I'm just relaying the cost structure, Riley said. Riley, can I install the firmware myself? Corliss asked. Mr. Bancroft, the firmware is locked behind the Service Advisor Diagnostic Platform, Riley replied. The Service Advisor is licensed to authorized dealers only. Independent installation is not supported by John Deere. Riley, the American Farm Bureau Memorandum of Understanding from January 2023 said John Deere would provide farmers and independent technicians access to repair information, parts, and tools, Corliss said. Mr. Bancroft, the MOU covers repair access, Riley answered. Firmware updates are a separate category. Riley, when does the technician get here? Corliss asked. Earliest is Thursday morning, October 10th at 8 a.m., Riley said. The shutdown timer hits 0 at 4 a.m. Thursday. The combine will need a service advisor cold start sequence after the timer triggers, which adds $1,400 to the labor. Total $8,400. Riley, so if I wait for your earliest available technician, the price goes from $7,000 to $8,400, Corliss said. Mr. Bancroft, that's the structure, Riley replied. Riley, I'll call you back, Corliss answered. Corliss hung up. Patience sat at the desk, looking down at her ledger. Wesley Bancroft walked into the kitchen at 8:42 a.m. from his guest bedroom in the deep blue ISU hoodie. He'd come home Friday evening for his father's 56th birthday. He'd planned to drive back to Chicago Sunday night. He'd extended his stay through Monday morning when he heard the S680 problem at Saturday dinner. Dad, Riley quoted $7,000? Wesley asked. Wesley, Riley quoted $7,000 and a Thursday morning install that pushes it to $8,400, Corliss replied. Dad, can I look at the S680's diagnostic port? Wesley, the firmware is locked behind the service advisor. Riley said independent installation isn't supported. Dad, I'm an embedded systems engineer who writes CAN-bus and J1939 diagnostic software for a living. The S680's diagnostic port is a standard 9-pin J1939 Deutsch connector. The firmware push is just a CAN-bus message sequence. Service Advisor is JD's proprietary front end. The underlying protocol is published in SAEJ 1939 standards. Wesley, are you saying you can push the firmware update yourself? Dad, I'm saying I can read the firmware update package, decompile the CAN-bus message sequence, and write a Python script on the ThinkPad in my room that pushes the same sequence through a $48 USB to CAN adapter from a Chinese vendor. I've done it for tractors at the AgTech firm I work at in Chicago. The S680 ECU is the same generation as the John Deere 9R41. Oh, we tested last August. Wesley, you've done it before? Dad, I've done it 14 times under controlled lab conditions on JD, Case YH, and Massey ECUs. The firmware push takes 42 minutes once the CAN-bus session is established. The S680's auto shutdown timer will reset to 0 when the firmware version reads V14.2.184 from the ECU. Wesley, what's the risk? Corliss asked. Dad, the technical risk is 0. The firmware is the same firmware Riley would push from Service Advisor. The legal risk is that John Deere's terms of service prohibit independent firmware installation under Section 14.4 of the Operation Center Agreement. The American Farm Bureau MOU from January 2023 explicitly preserves the farmer's right to repair, but the firmware update carve-out is contested. If JD Corporate decides to make an example of us, we could face a $4,800 contract violation penalty, plus loss of warranty coverage on the S680 powertrain through 2027. Wesley, the powertrain warranty is worth $24,000 if a major component fails before 2027. Dad, the powertrain warranty is worth $24,000 if a major component fails. The $7,000 firmware install is worth $7,000 today. The $8,400 Thursday install is worth $8,000. $400 plus the cold front damage on the 456 standing acres. The math depends on whether you trust your S680's powertrain through 2027. Wesley. Earl Braddock helped Hadley Trentham with a JD warranty fight last year. Earl knows Linwood Beecher at JD Champaign. Linwood came up at the Lyman family Paxton counter alongside Stuart Conroy. Maybe we make the call to Earl before we push the firmware. If you're still here, subscribe. The numbers in this story are real, and so is the firmware. Corliss called Earl Braddock at 9:14 a.m. Monday morning. Earl listened to the entire conversation with both hands flat on his own kitchen table while Ruth refilled his coffee. Corliss, Wesley can push the firmware? Earl asked. Earl, Wesley says 42 minutes once the CAN-bus session is established. He's done it 14 times in controlled lab conditions. The technical risk is zero. The legal risk is JD Corporate making an example of us. Corliss, Linwood Beecher at JD Champaign, came up at the Lyman counter from 1992 to 2014. Linwood is the right phone call before Wesley plugs in the ThinkPad. I'll call Linwood at 9:30 a.m. and have an answer by 10 a.m. Earl, call Linwood. Earl called Linwood Beecher at 9:30 a.m. Monday morning. Linwood listened to the situation. Linwood thought for a full minute before he spoke. Earl, the firmware update v14.2.184 isn't a safety-critical patch, Linwood said. It's a JDLink connectivity refresh. Field service issues it every 18 months. The cost structure Riley quoted is the published rate card. The cost is real. The cost is also approximately 14 times what the install actually requires. Linwood, what happens if Wesley pushes the firmware from his ThinkPad? Earl, technically the firmware will install correctly because Wesley knows what he's doing. The Operations Center will register the new firmware version against the S680's ECU serial within 24 hours of the next JDLink check-in. JD Corporate Compliance will see the unauthorized install. The question is what JD Corporate does with the visibility. Linwood, what does JD Corporate do? Earl asked. Earl, Kirby Tonneson at JD Corporate Moline Regional Compliance has been advocating internally for a softer enforcement approach on independent firmware installs since the January 2023 MOU was signed. Kirby's position is that farmer-installed firmware updates that match the official version should be tolerated to comply with the spirit of the Right to Repair Agreement. Kirby's position is not yet JD Corporate's official policy. The policy comes up for review at the Q1 2025 Corporate Council meeting. Linwood, what would you tell Corliss? Earl asked. Earl, I would tell Corliss that if his son installs the firmware correctly, JD Champaign won't pursue a contract violation on my watch. I'd tell Corliss to document the install, keep a video log, keep the CAN-bus session logs, keep a screenshot of the post-install ECU version. The documentation protects Corliss if Kirby's policy fight at corporate goes the wrong way next quarter. The documentation also helps Kirby's case if it goes the right way. Linwood, thank you for the answer. Earl, the answer is between us and the next time you and I talk. Officially, I never authorized the install. Unofficially, Wesley should plug in the ThinkPad. Linwood, the call between us. Earl, the call between us. Earl called Corliss at 10:14 a.m. Monday morning. Corliss, Linwood says push the firmware, document every step, keep the video log, keep the CAN-bus session logs, keep the ECU version screenshots before and after. Earl, Wesley starts at 11 a.m. Corliss, call me when the install completes. Patience walked into the kitchen at 10:24 a.m. Monday morning with a fresh pot of coffee. Wesley sat at the kitchen table with the ThinkPad open and a printed SAE J1939 specification PDF in his right hand. Wesley, you're really going to do this? Patience asked. Mom, I'm really going to do this, Wesley replied. Wesley, the warranty? Patience asked. Mom, Linwood Beecher at JD Champaign just told Dad through Earl Braddock that the install won't trigger the warranty clause if the firmware version matches the official release exactly. Linwood made the call between us pushing the firmware and JD Corporate making an example of the Bancroft 640. The Lyman counter-discipline is the safety net. Wesley, your father trusts you, Patience said. Mom, Dad trusts me because I trust the math. The CAN-bus protocol is published. The firmware package is downloadable from the JD owner portal. The service advisor is just the front end that JD Champaign charges $1, $400 a seat license for. The protocol underneath is the protocol underneath. I write CAN-bus code for a living at a Chicago AgTech firm. The S680's ECU is the same generation as the JD9R410 we tested last August. Wesley, what does the AgTech firm pay you? Mom, the firm pays me $124,000 a year base plus a $14,800 performance bonus. I write embedded systems code that does exactly this kind of CAN-bus interfacing for a living. The $7,000 JD Champaign quoted Dad is what the firm charges its commercial customers per install for the same work. The difference is the firm at least delivers a clean install. JD Champaign is charging for the right to push a button on a laptop that costs $14,800 in licensing per seat. Wesley, the firm's pricing isn't different. Mom, the firm's pricing isn't different because the firm sells to commercial fleets, not to farmers, Wesley said. The Bancroft 640 isn't a commercial fleet. The Bancroft 640 is my father's farm. The $7,000 isn't a fair price. The $48 in materials cost is the fair price. The labor I'm donating today is donated. Wesley, that's the right answer. Mom, that's the only answer. Wesley Bancroft set up his ThinkPad on the open tailgate of the deep blue 2018 Subaru Outback, parked beside the S680 at the headland of the South 240 at 10:48 a.m. Monday morning. The ThinkPad was a 2014 vintage T440p running Ubuntu Linux, 22.04 LTS with a custom CAN-bus diagnostic toolchain he'd written across 2022 and 2023. The $48 USB to CAN adapter, a CAN Able Pro v2.0 from a Chinese vendor on AliExpress, sat in a small black plastic case beside the ThinkPad. A 9-pin J1939 Deutsch connector at the end of a 14-foot harness ran from the adapter to the S680's diagnostic port under the cab dash. Patience set up a tripod camera at the side of the Subaru at 10:54 a.m. to document the install. Corliss stood beside her. Wesley sat on the open tailgate. Dad, CAN-bus session established at 11:02 a.m., Wesley said. Wesley, ECU version reads what? Corliss asked. Dad, ECU version reads V14.1.140, Wesley replied. Target version V 14.2.184. Delta is one major version, 4 minor versions, 44 patch versions. Total firmware package is 184 megabytes. Push time estimated at 42 minutes. Wesley pushed the firmware, Corliss said. Dad pushing the firmware at 11:08 a.m., Wesley answered. Wesley executed the firmware push at 11:08 a.m. Monday morning, the CAN-bus session held steady at 250 kilobits per second across the 42-minute push. The S680's dash showed a progress bar climbing from 0% at 11:08 a.m. to 100% at 11:50 a.m. At 11:51 a.m., the dash cleared the limp mode message and showed firmware VI 14.2.184 installed, ready for operation. The auto shutdown timer cleared. The JDLink uplink began transmitting fresh harvest data to Operations Center at 11:52 a.m. The S680 fired clean at 11:54 a.m. and ran the quad-range gears in the gravel headland. Dad, the S680's running V14.2.184, Wesley said. Wesley, 42 minutes, Corliss replied. Dad, 42 minutes against Riley's 3-hour install, Wesley answered. Wesley, $48 in CAN-bus adapter against $7,000 in Riley's quote, Corliss said. Dad, the math holds the way the math holds when you write the code yourself, Wesley replied. Wesley, the math holds, Corliss answered. Corliss harvested the remaining 456 acres of standing corn between 12:14 p.m. Monday and 6:18 p.m. Wednesday, 54 hours of combine time across 3 days. The Wednesday cold front arrived at 5:14 a.m. Thursday morning and dropped 1.4 inches across the Paxton area. The Bancroft 640 was empty of standing corn. The S680 sat back in the open machine shed by 6:42 p.m. Wednesday evening. The 2024 corn settlement at the Stern Equipment grain desk on a Friday afternoon came to $186,400. The full unimpaired 456-acre crop at $4.40 per bushel. Linwood Beecher called Corliss at 4:18 p.m. Friday afternoon. Corliss, Operations Center registered V14.2.184 on your S680's ECU serial at 12:14 p.m. Monday afternoon. JD Corporate Compliance flagged the install as unauthorized at 9:14 a.m. Tuesday. Kirby Tunnison at Moline Regional Compliance reviewed the documentation Wesley uploaded to the JD owner portal Tuesday afternoon. Kirby ruled the install was technically correct, the firmware version matched the official release exactly, and the install caused zero damage to the ECU or any connected system. Kirby closed the compliance flag at 4:42 p.m. Tuesday. Linwood, Kirby closed the flag? Corliss, Kirby closed the flag and forwarded your install documentation to JD Corporate Counsel as a case study for the Q1 2025 policy review on independent firmware installation. Your S680's powertrain warranty through 2027 stays intact. Riley Dunhaven was placed on administrative review effective this morning. Linwood, Riley was put on review for quoting the published rate card? Corliss, Riley was put on review for the dismissive chuckle in the recorded call Monday morning. JD Champaign service writers are required to maintain a customer-first tone. The chuckle violated the call standards. The review is procedural. Riley keeps his job. Linwood, that's a fair outcome. Corliss, the fair outcome is that your Wesley wrote a CAN-bus tool on a 2014 ThinkPad that saved you $7,000 and an entire 456-acre corn harvest. The fair outcome is also that JD Corporate is going to look harder at the firmware update revenue model in Q1 2025 because of the documentation Wesley uploaded. Linwood, Wesley's documentation goes into a corporate policy review. Corliss, Wesley's documentation is the cleanest independent firmware install audit log I've ever seen on a JDECU. Kirby is using it. The Q1 2025 policy review will reference your install as Exhibit A in the case for relaxing the firmware update enforcement. Linwood, that's the right outcome. Corliss, the right outcome. Earl sat at his own kitchen table at the Braddock farmstead at 8 p.m. Friday evening, October 11th, 2024, with Ruth across from him. The white ceramic coffee pot sat between them. Earl, Wesley wrote the firmware push in 42 minutes, Ruth said. Ruth, Wesley wrote the firmware push in 42 minutes on a 2014 ThinkPad with a $48 adapter, Earl replied. Earl, what would have happened if Wesley had been a finance major? Ruth asked. Ruth, the Bancroft 640 would have paid $8,400 for the Thursday morning service advisor install with the cold start sequence after the 48-hour shutdown timer hit zero, Earl said. The 456 acres of standing corn would have lost an estimated $14,800 to Thursday's cold front before the technician finished the install at 11 a.m. Thursday. Total cost to the Bancroft 640 would have been $23,200 against today's $48 in materials and a son's donated labor. Earl, $48 against $23,200. Ruth, $48 against $23,200. Because the son knew the CAN-bus protocol by chapter and the father raised him to come home for his birthday. Earl, that's the kind of math that makes a son worth raising. Ruth, that's the kind of math every father hopes his son grows up to do for him. Earl, what about the policy review at JD Corporate? Ruth, Kirby Tonneson forwarded Wesley's documentation to JD Corporate Counsel as Exhibit A in the Q1 2025 Firmware Update Policy Review. The review covers whether independent firmware installs that match the official release should remain a contract violation. Wesley's documentation is the cleanest audit log Kirby has ever seen on a JDECU. The policy may relax across the regional district by April 2025. Earl, Wesley moved the policy. Ruth, Wesley moved the policy by writing 42 minutes of code on a 2014 ThinkPad and uploading the audit log to the JD owner portal. Earl, the line gets held by the people who write the code. Ruth, the line gets held by the people who write the code. Earl drove out to the Bancroft farmstead on a clear Saturday afternoon in late October 2024 in the silver Chevy Silverado 2500. Corliss met him in the gravel drive. Earl wore the olive green John Deere mesh cap, the dark tan Carhartt chore coat over the buffalo check flannel, the Wrangler jeans, and the Red Wing Irish setter boots. His steel blue eyes met Corliss's. Corliss, the S680 is in the shed? Earl asked. Earl, the S680 is in the shed running V14.2.184, Corliss said. The 456 acres are settled at $186,400 At the stern equipment desk, the Wednesday cold front hit empty fields. "Corliss, what about Wesley?" Earl asked. "Earl, Wesley drove back to Chicago Tuesday morning after the install logs uploaded clean," Corliss replied. "His AgTech firm in Chicago wants to write him a $4,800 bonus for the unsanctioned field test of their CAN-bus toolchain. Wesley turned the bonus down. He said the install was for his father, not for the firm." "Corliss, Wesley turned the bonus down," Earl said. "Earl, Wesley said the math is the math," Corliss answered. "The $48 USB to CAN adapter saved his father $7,000 and a 456-acre harvest. The bonus would have priced the favor. Wesley wouldn't price the favor." "Corliss, that's the kind of math an embedded systems engineer does when the engineer is also a son," Earl said. "Earl, that's the kind of math my son does," Corliss replied. Dale Voss came by the Braddock farmstead on a clear Tuesday morning in early November 2024 in his white GMC Yukon. "Earl, heard Corliss Bancroft's son jailbroke a JD S680, Dale said. "Dale, Wesley Bancroft pushed a published firmware update through a standard J1939 diagnostic port, using protocols available in the SAE J1939 specification," Earl replied. JD Corporate Regional Compliance reviewed the install and closed the unauthorized install flag at 4:42 p.m. Tuesday. JD Corporate Counsel is using Wesley's documentation as Exhibit A in the Q1-2025 Firmware Update Policy Review. The S680's powertrain warranty through 2027 stays intact. The 2024 corn settled at $186,400 at the Stern Equipment Desk Friday afternoon. "You make it sound noble." "I make it sound right, Dale," Earl said. "Linwood Beecher at JD Champaign came up at the Lyman counter from 1992 to 2014. Linwood made the call between Wesley plugging in the ThinkPad and JD Corporate making an example of the Bancroft 640. The Lyman counter discipline held the line between $7,000 of revenue extraction and a son's CAN-bus tool on a 2014 ThinkPad. Dale shook his head with a wide, smug, mocking smirk and a dismissive shake of his head and climbed back into the Yukon and drove off without another word. The 2019 John Deere S680 sat in the open machine shed of the Bancroft 640 outside Paxton on the night of October 26, 2024, with $284,000 of certified used 2022 purchase price still in her dark factory green paint. The firmware version V14.2.184, freshly installed by a 27-year-old embedded systems engineer son on a 2014 ThinkPad with a $48 USB to CAN adapter, and the powertrain warranty through 2027 still intact, because Linwood Beecher made one phone call from the JD Champaign service manager's office Monday morning. The S680 ran clean. The firmware ran clean. The son wrote the code.